Imagine if every great book ever written, every scientific discovery, every philosophical idea, every map, every medical breakthrough, every story humanity had ever recorded existed in one single place. Now imagine watching it all disappear. More than 2,000 years ago, that nightmare may have become reality. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a library. It was humanity's greatest attempt to preserve knowledge. A place where kings invested fortunes, where scholars traveled across continents, and where the brightest minds of the ancient world gathered to unlock the secrets of the universe. Its shelves held the wisdom of Egypt, the mathematics of Greece, the astronomy of Babylon, the medicine of distant civilizations, and countless works that have never been seen again. Then, it vanished. Some blame Julius Caesar. Others blame religious violence. And some historians believe there was no single moment of destruction at all, that the world's greatest library didn't die in one night, but slowly disappeared, one generation at a time. If that's true, then humanity didn't just lose books. We may have lost forgotten discoveries, unfinished inventions, and answers to questions we are still asking today. But perhaps the greatest mystery isn't how the Library of Alexandria disappeared. It's what disappeared with it. Tonight, we journey back more than 23 centuries to uncover the rise, the glory, and the tragic fall of the greatest library ever built. To understand why the Library of Alexandria mattered, we first have to meet the man whose dream made it possible, a young conqueror whose ambition wasn't simply to rule the world, but to reshape it forever. Long before Rome became an empire, before the Great Wall of China stretched across mountains, and centuries before the first university opened its doors, one man imagined something the world had never seen before. Not a weapon, not a palace, not another monument carved into stone, but a place where every piece of human knowledge could live forever. His name was Alexander the Great. By the age of 30, he had conquered an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt, through Persia, and all the way to the edge of India. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen before him. Yet Alexander believed that true greatness wasn't measured only by the lands a ruler conquered, but by the ideas a civilization preserved. As a student of the legendary philosopher Aristotle, he understood something many kings never did. Empires rise, empires fall, but knowledge can outlive them all. In 331 BC, Alexander arrived on Egypt's Mediterranean coast. There, he found a quiet fishing village beside a small island called Pharos. To almost everyone else, it was little more than an empty shoreline. But Alexander saw something completely different. He saw the perfect crossroads between Africa, Asia, and Europe, a city where merchants would exchange more than gold and spices. They would exchange ideas. According to ancient accounts, Alexander personally marked out the city's design before continuing his campaign eastward. He would never return. Only a few years later, Alexander died unexpectedly in Babylon. At just 32 years old, his dream seemed destined to die with him. His vast empire was divided among his generals, each fighting to claim a piece of the world he had conquered. Egypt fell into the hands of one of Alexander's closest companions, Ptolemy. Unlike many rulers of the ancient world, Ptolemy understood that lasting power required more than armies. It required culture, learning, discovery. He wanted Alexandria to become more than a capital. He wanted it to become the intellectual heart of the ancient world, a city where the greatest minds would gather, where every important book could be found, and where humanity's collective knowledge would be protected for generations to come. It was an ambition unlike anything history had ever witnessed, and soon that impossible dream will begin to take shape, not as a temple, not as a fortress, but as the greatest library the world had ever known. Building a library sounds simple. Fill a building with books and open the doors. But Alexandria wasn't trying to build a library. It was trying to collect every book on earth. Building a library sounds simple. Find a building. Fill it with books. Open the doors. But Alexandria wasn't trying to build a library. It was attempting something no civilization had ever dared before. to gather every piece of human knowledge under one roof. For King Ptolemy I, this wasn't just an act of scholarship. It was a declaration to the world. If Egypt had once been a land of mighty pyramids, Alexandria will become the home of the greatest monument ever built for the human mind. Around the beginning of the 3rd century BC, construction began on what would become one of history's most extraordinary institutions. The library formed part of a larger complex known as the Mausoleum, or the Shrine of the Muses. It wasn't simply a place to read. It was something the ancient world had never truly seen before. A center where scholars lived together, studied together, debated together, and devoted their entire lives to discovering new knowledge. Inside its lecture halls, ideas were challenged. Inside its courtyards, philosophers argued beneath shaded colonnades. And inside its vast collections, the accumulated wisdom of centuries waited to be explored. But filling those shelves would become an obsession. The rulers of Alexandria didn't want hundreds of books. They didn't want thousands. They wanted every book that existed. Agents were sent across the Mediterranean, searching markets, temples, private collections, and distant cities. Every valuable manuscript they could find was purchased, borrowed, or copied, according to several ancient sources. Every ship entering the harbor of Alexandria faced an unusual inspection. Officials searched not only for cargo, but for books. Any scroll discovered on board was taken to the library. Teams of skilled scribes carefully copied every word by hand. The copy was returned to its owner. The original often remained in Alexandria. Whether every detail of that story is literally true remains uncertain. But ancient writers consistently described the Ptolemies' relentless determination to expand their collection. Year after year, the shelves continued to grow. Works from Greece, Egypt, Persia, Babylon, and many other parts of the ancient world arrived in Alexandria. Some historians believe the collection eventually reached hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls, making it the largest library humanity had ever created. But with every new scroll that arrived, another problem emerged. Knowledge was growing faster than anyone could organize it. Finding a single text inside the world's greatest library was becoming almost impossible. Then, one remarkable scholar came forward with an idea that would quietly change libraries forever. His name was Callimachus, and without realizing it, he invented something that every modern library, every university, and even every search engine still depends on today. Imagine walking through the streets of Alexandria, past busy marketplaces, towering temples, and ships arriving from every corner of the Mediterranean. Ahead of you stands one of the most extraordinary places ever built. Not a palace, not a temple, but a sanctuary dedicated to knowledge. As you step inside, the noise of the city begins to fade. Long marble corridors stretch into the distance. Sunlight pours through high windows, casting soft beams across polished stone floors. Oil lamps flicker beside towering wooden shelves, filled with thousands upon thousands of carefully rolled papyrus scrolls. The air carries the scent of ink, fresh papyrus, and cedar wood used to protect the precious manuscripts. This wasn't a place of silence. It was alive. Scholars debated philosophy in open courtyards. Mathematicians covered wax tablets with impossible calculations. Astronomers mapped the movements of distant stars. Physicians compared centuries of medical observations, hoping to better understand the human body. Poets read their newest works aloud, while historians carefully compared different versions of the same events. Every room echoed with questions. Every conversation searched for answers. The library was only one part of a much larger institution known as the Mausoleum, a community where scholars lived, studied, taught, and carried out research together. It functioned less like a modern public library and more like one of history's earliest research centers. Many of history's greatest thinkers either worked here, visited, or were deeply connected to its scholarly community. One of them was Eratosthenes. More than 2,000 years before satellites, he calculated the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy, using nothing more than shadows, geometry, and careful observation. another brilliant inventor, Heron of Alexandria, experimented with steam-powered machines that amazed those who witnessed them. They were little more than scientific demonstrations, yet they hinted at ideas the world would not fully embrace for another 17 centuries. Meanwhile, scholars worked tirelessly to compare ancient manuscripts. No two copies of a famous work were always identical. Errors crept in as generations of scribes copied text by hand. So the scholars of Alexandria compared countless versions, line by line, word by word, trying to preserve the most accurate knowledge possible. As the collection expanded into hundreds of thousands of scrolls, finding anything became an overwhelming challenge. Then one man transformed the chaos into order. His name was Callimachus. Instead of arranging scrolls randomly, he created an enormous catalog known as the Pinox, stretching across roughly 120 volumes. It organized authors, subjects, titles, and locations inside the library. For the first time in history, knowledge itself had been systematically indexed, long before computers, long before databases, and long before search engines. Alexandria had created something astonishing, a way to find information inside the largest collection of knowledge the world had ever known. It was a masterpiece of organization, and it made the impossible possible. But while the library reached the height of its glory, events far beyond its walls were beginning to reshape the ancient world. A storm was approaching, not from the sea, but from Rome. One of history's greatest generals arrived in Alexandria. His name was Julius Caesar, and for centuries, many believed he was the man who destroyed the greatest library on earth. For nearly 3 centuries, the Library of Alexandria stood as the intellectual heart of the ancient world. Its shelves continued to grow, its scholars continued to debate, and its reputation spread across the Mediterranean. But while knowledge flourished inside its walls, the world beyond them was changing. A new power was rising, Rome. By the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic had become the dominant force in the Mediterranean, and in 48 BC, its civil war reached the shores of Alexandria. At the center of that conflict stood one man, Julius Caesar. Fresh from the pursuit of his rival, Pompey, Caesar arrived in Egypt expecting a quick political victory. Instead, he found himself trapped inside a dangerous struggle for the Egyptian throne. Queen Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, were fighting for control of the kingdom. Caesar chose to support Cleopatra. Soon, Alexandria became a battlefield. Enemy forces surrounded the harbor. Escape was impossible. Facing the risk of losing his fleet, Caesar made a desperate decision. He ordered his ships to be set on fire. The flames quickly consumed the vessels. But fire is unpredictable, driven by strong coastal winds. The blaze spread from the docks into nearby buildings. For centuries, many believed those flames reached the great library itself, destroying humanity's greatest collection of knowledge in a single catastrophic night. It is one of history's most famous stories. But was it really true? The answer is far more complicated. Ancient writers disagree about what actually happened. Some claim that the fire destroyed part of the library. Others suggested that warehouses storing scrolls near the harbor were damaged instead. And several accounts written after Caesar's time describe scholars still working in Alexandria, long after the famous fire had ended. That alone raises an important question. If the library survived for centuries afterward, could Caesar really have destroyed it completely? Many modern historians think the answer is no. Most believe the harbor fire almost certainly caused serious damage, but not the total destruction of the library. The surviving ancient evidence points to a more complex story than the popular legend of a single night of devastation. There is another clue. Only a few years later, Mark Antony is said to have presented Cleopatra with around 200,000 scrolls from the Library of Pergamum. If that account is accurate, it suggests Alexandria's collection had suffered significant losses, serious enough that rebuilding it became a royal priority. Whatever burned in 48 BC, it was important, but it was not the end. The world's greatest library was wounded, yet endured. For generations, its scholars continued teaching, its scribes continued copying manuscripts, and its halls continued guarding humanity's greatest ideas. No one knew it then, but the greatest threat to Alexandria was still waiting. Not one conqueror, not one battle, but centuries of war, political upheaval, religious conflict, and something even more powerful than fire, time. The Library of Alexandria did not vanish in a single day. It disappeared, one empire at a time. And with every new ruler, another piece of humanity's greatest treasure slipped away forever. History often prefers simple endings. One battle, one fire, one final moment. But the story of the Library of Alexandria refuses to fit that pattern. If Julius Caesar's fire damaged the library, it did not erase it. For years, perhaps even centuries, Alexandria continued to shine as one of the world's greatest centers of learning. Students still arrived from distant lands. Scholars still copied ancient manuscripts. Astronomers still watched the heavens. And philosophers still argued over questions that continue to challenge us today. The library had survived, but survival was becoming harder with every generation. The mighty Ptolemaic kingdom eventually disappeared, absorbed into the growing Roman Empire. The rulers who had once poured enormous wealth into scholarship were gone. New emperors had different priorities. Wars demanded money. Armies demanded supplies. And maintaining one of the world's largest collections of knowledge became increasingly difficult. Scrolls made from papyrus were never meant to last forever. Without constant care, they cracked, faded, and slowly crumbled into dust. Every damaged manuscript had to be copied by hand. A single mistake could alter an entire sentence. A missed copy could erase a work forever. The library depended on continuous investment, careful preservation, and generations of dedicated scholars. As those resources declined, the collection slowly began to shrink. Then came another wave of change. During the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire entered a period of political instability and repeated conflict. Alexandria itself became the scene of violent battles. One of the most destructive came during the reign of Emperor Aurelian. Fighting swept through parts of the city, including districts where many historians believe important scholarly buildings once stood. Exactly how much of the library survived these conflicts, no one knows. The historical record grows increasingly silent. Centuries later, another transformation reshaped Alexandria. Christianity spread throughout the Roman world. Ancient pagan temples were closed, repurposed, or destroyed. Some later writers connected these religious conflicts to the final disappearance of the library, but the evidence remains uncertain. No surviving contemporary account describes a single dramatic event in which the entire library was deliberately burned during this period. Instead, the trail simply grows colder. The voices of the scholars fade. The catalogs disappear. The references become fewer, until eventually, the greatest library on earth slips almost completely out of history. Perhaps that is the most heartbreaking part of all. There was no final farewell. No witness standing before towering flames. No single day when humanity realized what it was losing. The library did not vanish with one explosion or one conqueror. It faded little by little as wars destroyed cities, governments changed, funding disappeared, and priceless scrolls quietly decayed beyond repair. Sometimes, history isn't lost because someone chooses to destroy it. Sometimes, it disappears because no one is left to protect it. And with every scroll that vanished, another piece of humanity's memory vanished with it. But an even greater question remains. What exactly did we lose? Were they simply old books? Or could they have contained discoveries that might have changed the course of civilization itself? Imagine opening a scroll and finding a discovery that modern science wouldn't make for another 1,000 years. It sounds impossible, yet no one can say for certain because those scrolls are gone forever. Imagine opening an ancient scroll and discovering an idea centuries ahead of its time, a forgotten mathematical formula, a revolutionary medical treatment, a map of lands no longer remembered, or the only surviving copy. A masterpiece that vanished forever. It sounds like fiction, but it may not be. For hundreds of years, The Library of Alexandria gathered writings from across the known world: Greek philosophers, Egyptian priests, Babylonian astronomers, Persian scholars, poets, historians, engineers, and physicians. Many of those works survived because copies were made elsewhere, but countless others existed nowhere else. When they disappeared, they were gone forever. We don't know exactly how many scrolls the library once contained. Ancient estimates range from a few 100,000 to well over 500,000. Modern historians debate those numbers, but they agree on one thing: the collection was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Among its shelves may have rested complete works by authors whose names survive, but whose writings do not. Today, we know that many ancient books have been lost forever. Sometimes, only their titles remain. Sometimes, only a single sentence quoted by another writer. And sometimes, nothing at all. Imagine trying to understand Shakespeare after losing every play except a few scattered quotations. That is the challenge historians face with much of the ancient world. Some people believe the library contained inventions that could have transformed civilizations centuries earlier: steam engines, advanced machines, secret technologies. But there is no reliable historical evidence to support those claims. The truth is both less dramatic and far more powerful. The greatest loss wasn't one miraculous invention. It was the disappearance of thousands of independent ideas, observations, experiments, and stories that together formed humanity's collective memory. Knowledge grows one discovery at a time. Every generation builds upon the work of those who came before. When part of that foundation disappears, progress becomes slower. Questions must be asked again, experiments repeated, mistakes rediscovered. The Library of Alexandria wasn't valuable because it held magical secrets. It was valuable because it preserved the conversations of civilizations. Without those voices, entire chapters of human history became impossible to reconstruct. Even today, archaeologists continue uncovering forgotten texts buried beneath desert sands, hidden inside ancient monasteries, or preserved by pure chance in unusually dry climates. Each new discovery reminds us how much has survived, but it also reminds us how much is not. Perhaps somewhere inside the library, there was a scroll that explained how the pyramids were organized. Perhaps there was a lost history of Alexander's final years. Perhaps there were scientific observations centuries ahead of their time. Or perhaps those answers never existed at all. That is the burden of history. Once knowledge is lost, we cannot know what we no longer have. And maybe that uncertainty is the Library of Alexandria's greatest legacy. It continues to remind us that civilization is not only built by creating knowledge, but by protecting it. More than 2,000 years have passed, and the Library of Alexandria is still gone, yet its story has never truly ended. Because today, humanity faces the same question the ancient world once did. How do we protect knowledge before it disappears again? More than 2,000 years have passed. The shells of Alexandria are gone. The scrolls have vanished. The voices of countless ancient scholars have fallen silent. Yet, somehow, the Library of Alexandria still exists, not in stone, but in an idea. The belief that knowledge should be collected, protected, shared, and passed from one generation to the next. Every modern library, every university, every research institute, and every digital archive carries a small piece of that same dream. Today, billions of books, documents, photographs, and scientific discoveries are preserved across the world. Many exist not only on paper, but on servers, hard drives, and in the cloud. Humanity has never possessed more knowledge than it does today. Yet, that doesn't mean it is safe. History has shown us that knowledge can disappear in many ways. War can destroy it, fire can consume it, neglect can erase it, and in the digital age, a single cyber attack, a corrupted archive, or obsolete technology can make priceless information inaccessible. The challenge has changed, but the responsibility remains the same: to preserve what we know before it is lost. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson Alexandria left behind. Civilizations are remembered not only for the monuments they build, but for the ideas they protect. The pyramids still stand. Ancient temples still rise from the desert. But the greatest treasure of Alexandria was never made of stone. It was made of words, ideas, questions, curiosity, the desire to understand the universe, and to leave that understanding behind for those who would come after. That dream survived, even when the library itself did not. In 2002, just a few kilometers from the site of the ancient library, Egypt opened the Bibliotheca Alexandrina. It is not the original library. No modern building could ever replace what was lost, but it stands as a tribute to one of humanity's greatest ambitions, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge never truly ends. Perhaps we will never know exactly what disappeared from Alexandria. Perhaps some answers have been lost forever, but every new discovery, every ancient manuscript uncovered, and every question asked by curious minds continues the work that began there more than 23 centuries ago. Because the true legacy of the Library of Alexandria was never the scrolls themselves. It was a belief that knowledge belongs to all humanity, and that every generation has a responsibility to protect it. If this story fascinated you, you'll love what comes next. Subscribe to Silent History, because next week we'll uncover another mystery that history almost forgot. If you enjoyed this documentary, leaving a like helps more people discover these forgotten stories. And if someone you know loves history, share this journey with them. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop learning. I'll see you in the next story.